Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
And we'd like to welcome everybody back to the Football's Family Podcast. And here's the thing about this particular show. My guest is going to educate me today because growing up in Tennessee, you're usually bombarded with one of two things. The SEC is number one. The SEC is everywhere here in Tennessee, but also University of Tennessee. There's orange everywhere, from Knoxville to the Tennessee River, which I'm right close to the Tennessee River. It is orange everywhere. But I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, especially, and it is now too, but in the 80s and 90s, especially, NBC would play a certain team, I think every Saturday, and they would pick up the show, or maybe it was CBS, but I would see Notre Dame football just about every Saturday. Now, I'm going to let my guest introduce himself here and talk about the book he wrote. But I want him to walk me through some of the history of that if he knows that. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mark Hubbard, and I'm the author of the new book that just came out on August 1st called Era, A-R-A, and it's the authorized biography of Ara Parseghian, who was the coach at Notre Dame for 11 years from 1964 to 1974. And it was a project. It's my third football project. I've written previous books, one with my brother about the 1953 team at Notre Dame called Forgotten Four, about the four guys in the backfield who all were number 1 through 10 draft picks in the NFL draft. That's never happened before. And then I did a follow-on book around the 66 national championship team called Undisputed. And that led to this particular book because in writing the book about the 66 team, I got to be very good friends with Coach Ara Parseghian, who was the coach. And so over the years, I collected a lot of memories and wrote some things down. And after he passed, his wife, Katie, called me and said she would like me to write Ara's biography. And so that's been a labor of love. It's taken 5 years, but it's now out on bookshelves, and you can get it from Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com, and it's published by the University of Notre Dame Press. And so I'm pretty proud of it. And I think if you're a football fan, not just a Notre Dame fan, I think you'll find this to be an interesting book in what I call the golden age of college football, which is certainly started in about 1966 when games were on television with regularity. And I don't know when it ended, but it certainly is not the golden age right now. I think today's football is very confused and very hard to follow, and in some ways has lost kind of the luster of the amateur game.
Well,
so you can start asking me any questions you like. I'd happy to inform you on anything about Notre Dame football that I might know, or about Ara.
Okay. All right. So I'm agreeing with you. I don't follow a whole lot of college football, to be honest. I'm more of a pro guy, but I respect the college game. All right. I respect the college game. In fact, this year, Lord willing, in about 3 weeks, my daughter will be cheerleading at Vanderbilt game. So I get to see my first college football game in probably 3 or 4 years. It's been a while. I think all those endorsements and the money thing is causing a lot of problems with college football now. But I was thinking you're talking about the 60s and the 70s being the golden age. And could it have something to do with the coaches?
Well, there's an adage that I learned from a friend of mine named John Underwood, who wrote some very good sports books and was a writer for Sports Illustrated. And he wrote an article once, and he started the article with, "College football is a coach's game." And then he followed on with what he thought was all the evidence. And I kind of subscribe to that. If you see a good college football program, you almost always can look and find that behind that is an outstanding coach. It's very rare that you don't find good programs without great coaches. Sometimes it happens, but great coaches tend to attract good players and good assistants and have good discipline and be good strategists. And so I think that college football is very much defined by coaching. And of course, in the SEC, that's for sure. There's lots of great coaches there. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of the coaches that are making big salaries now adjust to the new realities of college football. That will be interesting to watch.
All right, so and I agree with you. I agree with you. So let me ask you a question. We were talking just a little bit ago. Like I said, I'm here in Tennessee. I'm limited in a lot of my scope to SEC football.
Right.
2:30 every Saturday, CBS. It's the SEC game of the week. If I bought the ESPN stuff, I could watch it. I will watch some of the Tennessee games, some of the Alabama games, and some of the Georgia games. That's typically what I watch.
Right.
I don't know what I think about Texas and Oklahoma being the SEC. That doesn't sit well with me, not because of Texas, Oklahoma, but because of the location of their schools. Like some of the Pac-10 schools or Pac-12 schools are now in the Big Ten. Just
right.
Something about that doesn't sound right to me. I'm a purist that way.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of background on, because you obviously have dealt with, are you a graduate of Notre Dame?
I'm a Notre Dame grad, and as is my son, and I am an adjunct professor there, teach part-time in my retirement. But so the writing the book was an avocation, not my primary vocation.
Okay. So if I were to say that you know a little bit about Notre Dame, you would say you do.
I would think so, yeah.
All right, good. See, that's the humility part. I love that. I gathered that from you when I was talking, that you know it and you're fine with that. Tell me, somebody who is ignorant, tell me what you think it would take for me to no longer be ignorant about the history of Notre Dame football.
Well, there's some very good books, and you can talk. There are four things about Notre Dame that almost anybody on the street that knows anything about college or football will tell you. It's kind of our brand, that they will tell you that we're a good academic institution, that we're Catholic, that we have a football team that's got some notoriety over historical years. And the fourth thing is, many people tell you that they actually know somebody that went there, or they know of somebody like Regis Philbin or Rudy or somebody like that. And those four things are kind of the branding benchmarks for Notre Dame. But it really started in 1913 with the forward pass and Newt Rockne being a player, and we got prominence by playing Army in the early days. And then Newt Rockne became the coach in 1919. And of course, he's a very famous football coach, a great promoter, a great innovator. And he started to play bigger schools that were prominent in college football in those years. Some Ivy League schools, some teams in the Western Athletic Conference, which became the Big Ten. And then they would travel to other places, to get a game. And Rockne, I think, really drove the image of Notre Dame from 1919 until his death in 1931, his accidental death in an airplane crash. So he bridged kind of the newspaper age to the radio age. And a lot of people, including my own grandmother, were very active in listening to Notre Dame football games.
Okay. Stop right there for just a second. I hate to interrupt you, but I want you to take that concept and go a little bit further for me.
Right.
Branding in the age that you're in is so important in it.
Yes.
If you're in the radio or the newspaper or the internet age, if you can brand a team, it will help with donors, it help with everything, right?
Right.
Does the radio, okay, because we know Ronald Reagan was a radio announcer.
Right.
That tells you something right there. The radio made such a big difference. Did that cause some people, or if you know this answer, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But did that cause some people to gravitate toward Notre Dame football, even if they didn't know what they looked like, even though they didn't know where Notre Dame was? even though they just heard it on the radio?
Well, I think that Rockne was in an era of newspapers, and he knew how to play the print media pretty well. Um, Radio didn't really come along in terms of a fan media till the late 20s, early 1930s. But yes, radio became the thing that was able to go coast to coast. And by then there was a sense that Notre Dame represented a very large group of immigrant people, mostly Catholic, and their success kind of bonded everybody together. And what's today known as the Subway alumni. You don't have to be an alum of Notre Dame to root for Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got fans all over the country. I think that was the evolution. And of course, in the 30s, we had some good teams and some good games. But then after the war years, Frank Leahy raised prominence again, where we had 4 teams that never lost a game in the late 40s, 3 national championships. And that was another kind of spike in the awareness. And that was definitely a radio era because, radio was prominent. There was no television in the late 40s. And so then Leahy moved on. He had health issues and retired. And what we had in Notre Dame at those days, what we called the period of penance from about 1954 to 1964, where our teams did some interesting things. We beat Oklahoma and stopped their NCAA winning streak. Had a Heisman Trophy winner, Paul Horning.
That was 54 games, wasn't it? Something like that. It was
a number of games. But we never really got into the national championship hunt. And so the Notre Dame was desperate for a coach that could bring back prominence like Rockne and Leahy. And in searching for a coach, they found that Eric Parsegian was an interesting candidate because he had beat Notre Dame 3 times when he was at Northwestern. And he was interested in changing jobs at that point in time. So that was the evolution of Era getting to Notre Dame. And of course, the 11 years of Era Parsegian at Notre Dame were really high quality years. 2 national championships, a third if you count the one from the National Football Foundation, and could have had a 4th with, in 1971, if Nebraska had lost their bowl game, we finished 2nd. So those are really, really good years of Notre Dame football. And those are the years also when people remember watching the Sunday morning show with Lindsey Nelson and Paul Horning that would be the 1-hour recap show. And so the brand is kind of kept alive. And then, of course, after Era, we had some down years, but then Lou Holtz came along and revitalized the brand again. And we're hoping that Marcus Freeman is going to be able to add more luster to the Notre Dame story.
You mentioned Paul Horning, and I knew the answer to that. I'm like, he did play for Notre Dame. The one that I know the most, and this is the one that I know the most watching is Joe Montana. But Brady Quinn did too, and he did poorly in the NFL, but he was a pretty good player for Notre Dame. But y'all have had some amazing players that have gone through Notre Dame system, just amazing people over the years.
Well, we've attracted a kind of a young man who was interested in a quality education because it's academically difficult. And also, if you're going to be on television, that helps because people like to get showcased on TV. And for those years when Era was there, people that were excellent athletes, especially at Catholic high schools, were kind of programmed to look at Notre Dame as one of their choices. And so that all worked in our favor. I think it's a little bit different today, though. I think that we are a national team, but now the competition for players is much more challenging. A lot of colleges have capable teams, good football programs, And then, of course, you add NIL in the portal, and that's another level of influence that I think we haven't really fully digested yet in college football.
You look at teams, and I'm sure Notre Dame, of course, that's not necessarily what I want to talk about, but you're here and we're going to talk. I'm sure Notre Dame has a pretty deep fan base that can give money. But you have teams like Texas who had incredible, just unlimited coffers. And that's where I have a problem with it. I get that you need to pay them for their likeness, but some of these guys that I'm reading about will not go to the NFL. They will milk as much as they can because they'll make more money in playing college football than they would in the NFL.
Well, it's an issue for sure. One of the things about Notre Dame that I like is we've stayed an independent. We haven't gone into a conference, and I hope we stay that way. But we're a relatively small school. People don't realize that we only have about 8,500 undergraduates, which would put us on the very, very small end of major college footballs in terms of number of students. And so for that reason, we have not as many graduates as a lot of the larger state schools have. You mentioned Texas, but you could go down the list of schools that have, 20, 30, 40,000 students and a lot of football fans, especially if there's state loyalties. And so you're right, there's going to be a move to have that fan base start to support with dollars the NIL and try to pay top dollar for top players. I don't know where it's headed, but I don't think it's in a good spot. And I don't think education is necessarily the thing that the young men are making decisions about, although parents tend to think more about that. And I hope we can stay competitive. But we're not a school that has a large alumni base, although I think our alumni base is very loyal. And I think to a certain extent, they will want to be competitive in the NIL world so that our football team is competitive. I don't think there'll be much interest in some of the other sports where we've done well, but we haven't excelled like in football.
Y'all had a pretty good basketball team for a while. That's what I remember.
Yeah. We have a good hockey team now. We have a great women's basketball program.
Yes, you do.
But those are not the same kind of marquee sports as football can be. And of course, the revenue at Notre Dame, the revenue and profit for football pays for the entire athletic department, which is very rare in college football.
That's something that, look, I went to a school. I went to Freed-Hardeman in Henderson, Tennessee. We don't have a football team. We have a joke at Freed-Hardeman that we've been undefeated since 1869. There's one thing, if I can go back and do my college over again, I probably wouldn't change anything, but boy, it would be nice to go to a place that has a Saturday football team.
Yeah.
When you went to Notre Dame, it was a draw, wasn't it, on Saturdays?
Oh, huge. I got there as a freshman in the fall of 1967, and we were coming off the 1966 national championship year. And of course, when you win a national championship, the enthusiasm just really rockets up. And so I was totally engrossed in the fortunes of our team. Of course, it was all male at the time. And there's nothing like the enthusiasm around a successful football team on campus. It just makes everything, I think, a lot brighter, a lot more interesting. And so, yeah, I was part of that. And I try to capture some of that in the biography because those are the era years. And one of the reasons why he was an appealing person for me to do a biography about was because I was there as a student. I didn't know him until later in his life, but obviously you can see the impact of what a great coach and a great team can have on a university, the entire campus and the entire fan base.
I was looking up here. I love their national championship ring that year.
Yeah.
I like the simplicity of it.
Yes.
If you can't, I'll see if I could put well, I don't own the rights to these pictures, so I can't really do that.
Right.
But it's a basic, is that the Notre Dame blue?
That's a blue that we use to match the gold in our football uniforms. We also have a lighter blue
Okay.
but I have one of those national championship rings because the 66 team made me an honorary member. And so it's a very handsome ring, but as you say, it's not garish.
And
It's one that you can wear around, and people, unless they really know about your background, they don't think of it as a national championship ring.
that's respectful that they gave you the ring. That's awesome. But I'm
Well, I
looking
had to pay for it, but it was respectful. I value it very much because the team
well,
voted.
even if you have to pay for it, if they make you a member of that team, that's
Yeah.
something you say thank you very much to.
Oh, yes.
But it has the Notre Dame on the top, ND, national championships, and on the side, obviously it has the player.
Right.
Well, if I'm looking at it correctly. But what you find today with the rings, they're just gigantic. I like the simplicity because that's beauty and simplicity. It's kind of like the first two rings for Green Bay, which Paul Hornung was on.
Right.
I believe he was on both of them, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. They're very basic and they're very beautiful. So the
Yeah,
bigger
the rings today are like paperweights. You know, you'd be afraid to wear one out in public because your hand might get tired.
it's not even that. I found there's a couple of rings now, Mr. Mark, that have detachable tops to them.
Huh.
And like that's actually cool. One of them has, and I think it's the Los Angeles Rams one. I believe it is.
Yeah.
You take the top off, and inside they have a little stadium, and they have a piece of the turf in there.
Wow.
That thing probably weighs 80 pounds, but if you lose the top of it, you lose the vast majority of the diamonds.
Right.
So, we just have a few more minutes, and I do appreciate your time here. And if you would, you have my email. If you want to send me a link to your book, if not, I think I can find it. But if you have any links, just let me know and I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure.
And some of the newer rings that y'all have for the championships are beautiful too. You don't have to have, like you say, garish rings. It's simplicity. Some of the older ones from USC and Alabama, just very basic and just awesome in a way.
Yeah, no, you want to be able to wear it and enjoy it, and a lot of people enjoy seeing one of those. The new ones they have to be put in safe deposit boxes, I think.
I don't think too many people wear them anymore because they can't do it. The latest Alabama ring that I remember seeing, I was watching the guys fit them. You know, you get fitted and then you get the ring.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the rings. My hands aren't that big, but I was looking at these are big old guys. So they're obviously the rings are going to be bigger, but you look at it, and it's like a bracelet almost for their finger. I'm like, all right.
Yep.
If you had a memory and you've seen Notre Dame football for 60 some odd years, if not longer.
Right.
I remember watching some of the video of Joe Montana playing
Right.
for Notre Dame. That's one of the things I remember. I remember, several games, but usually it's from the other side. Notre Dame is you either love them or you hate them. It's like the Cowboys. You love them or you hate them.
Right.
What are some of your memories because obviously you love them and I respect that. What are some of the memories that you have about Notre Dame football that you just cherish?
Well, one really stands out, and it's mentioned in the book, but it doesn't stand out because it was something that was part of a game on the field. When I was a sophomore, maybe it was a junior, we had a guy come back to Notre Dame at halftime. He was somebody you'll recognize right away, but he was our captain when I was a freshman. His name was Rocky Blyer.
Oh, yeah.
And Rocky Blyer was one of the few professional athletes that was actually drafted and served in the Vietnam War. And he was seriously injured. And he came back for a halftime. I have a photo of this in the book. And at halftime, he was on the sideline with our president, Father Hesburgh, and he had canes to hold him up because he could barely walk. And that struck home to all of us, all 69,000 people in the stadium, all of a sudden had a face for the war in Vietnam. It was the guy that 2 years earlier had been running as a halfback. And he, at that time when I saw him, I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when he came to halftime and said a few words. Of course, that's it. We didn't know at that time that his story would continue, and he became one of the most courageous players ever, because he rehabbed himself and went back and played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, as many of your listeners will know, and has 4 Super Bowl rings.
He did okay.
He did okay, and he's on the cover of 3 Sports Illustrateds. And he's now, over time, become a very close friend. And he wrote the foreword to this book, which is very poignant because he was very, very close to Coach Parsegian. And so all of these things about that event are very strong for me. Now, Rocky got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, and he's got a plaque in the corridor of Wounded Warriors in the Pentagon. And I think he just typifies what I think is best about college football and about Notre Dame. He, a guy that really served his country, did a good job, excelled, worked hard to bring himself back, and today is a very successful public speaker. He does a lot of motivational speaking, and so that's my moment. My moment would be at halftime of that game when he returned. We have other great highlights, but that's my moment.
That's your moment. That's what I want. This is the football's family, Mr. Mark. Now, who did you say was the president at that time?
Father Theodore Hesburgh, Father Ted Hesburgh.
He is the one there in the middle. Right. I'm looking at a picture. Of course, it's blurry, but it's blurry, so I'm sorry you can't see it, but that's him right
there. Yep, I see it.
You know what okay, you were mentioning Rocky. I was completely ignorant. I knew obviously he played for Pittsburgh. He's an amazing man. I didn't realize he played for Notre Dame. The story I remember is, you remember the old NFL films?
Sure.
Oh yeah, the Sables, they did an amazing job. He was talking about his experience in Vietnam, and he said that what happened for him, and if you want to know what type of man this guy is, this is what I'm talking about right here. He said that there was a grenade rolling toward him, and I think he moved some people out of the way and either leapt on it or was right next to it. I don't remember the story behind it, but he said that the grenade exploded out.
Right.
And not up. And he said if it exploded up, I would have died, but it exploded out. Most of the damage that a grenade does is either through shrapnel or through the concussive blast. And what can happen is that your body, you may not see it on the outside, but it's on the inside. And what I understand about Rocky is the inside was just shattered, tore up.
Yep.
And for him to come back and do what he did as a result of it, I'm looking at pictures right now.
He was also shot in the leg. He had 2 injuries in the same incident, actually.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Yeah. He was in rehab in Kansas at a hospital for a long time. And when he was heading home to Appleton, Wisconsin, he wanted to visit Notre Dame. And that was the event that brought him to halftime and to the crowd seeing him. So,
okay, I'm looking at a picture.
I tried to weave into the book some of the cultural things of the times, and you couldn't ignore the Vietnam War if you're going to talk about era in that time frame. But what a great way to tell that story through one of his players.
I'm looking at a picture of him now in the hospital, and I see the leg part. I was not aware of his leg. See, that makes his story even greater than that. Yeah. Oh, good night. I'm looking at some more pictures. Jerome Bettis. Yes, he played for Notre Dame too. That was one of the best straight ahead running backs that you'll ever see. Golly.
Well, you forgot Joe Montana.
Yeah, Joe Montana is what I remember the most about it. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Mark, some of the uniforms that he was wearing in my memories are the blue ones that you're talking about. I love the combination of the blue and the gold. That's, I know you had nothing to do with it, but take full credit for it because they look great.
Yeah. Well, we like generally speaking, traditional uniforms, although once a year we do a game that we call the Shamrock Series, and they do a special uniform. But I like the traditional uniforms myself.
I think they played one of those series in Ireland, and that was beautiful. I watched that game because that's amazing. Been to Ireland before. All I remember is a two-level McDonald's. I wasn't there very long. My people are in Scotland. When I was over there, they don't have football in Scotland. If I said football, they said it's soccer or it's rugby. I'm like, no, we're good. American football. What I respect about number you and number two, the Notre Dame football is when you have a fan base that gives as much. You said 8,500. That blows me away because I always picture we have a school in Murfreesboro, MTSU, that has like 40,000 people.
Right.
My alma mater averaged 1,500 when I was there. Now it's up to 2,500. 8,500. I always thought it was up in the 20s or 30s. Wow.
Right.
You have a dedicated fan base that eats, sleeps, breathes, drinks Notre Dame, don't they?
Well, yes. I mean, and it's not just football. It's a wonderful environment to go and be a student there. The adage that I heard one valedictorian many years ago say is, when you talk about Notre Dame and you're on the outside looking in, you don't understand it, and when you're on the inside looking out, you can't explain it. It's a very special place, and football is part of that legacy and that specialness.
Do you think football added to the lore, or was it always going to have the lore of Notre Dame, like with education?
No, I think football was the thing that catapulted a small school in the upper Indiana Midwest to have national prominence, and it generated a lot of income early years of the school that allowed it to grow and to become a good academic institution. And I think today the idea that we still are able to pay for our athletic department through our football revenues is the thing that makes us one of the few in the country that can do that. So I think that's a good thing.
Well, I respect that, and that again. If you could, I respect that because I think with any types of schools that if you have a fan base, alumni base, or if you have people who are families that are still donating, still helping,
right,
because the school means that much to them, the program means that much to the education means that much to them. That tells you how much that whole university means to people. That's rare.
Right.
So, Mr. Mark, first off, you're going to send me a link. I'm going to put it in the show notes. So if you want to get his book and to get Rocky Blyer on there to do your forward is amazing. I respect that so much. That dude is just incredible because of what he did on the field, but even more for the man he is and what he's been through. That's a lot of encouragement. But number two, if you can give me one thing that a guy in Tennessee here that like I said, is not so ignorant now because you have educated me, but if you can give me one more story, just real quick, about Notre Dame football, that would make this a perfect ending for this show that I really enjoyed, by the way. I really enjoyed talking with you. You're awesome. Just real quick.
Well, think about this. In 1966, there was a very famous game, a 10-10 tie with Michigan State. They're still talking about that game. But what people don't talk about, and I wrote an entire book on that subject, in 1966, the defense at Notre Dame, the defensive unit, there were only 38 total points scored against Notre Dame in 10 games. The defense only allowed 24 points in 10 games and had 6 shutouts. There's no other team in college football history that has averaged a 2.4 points per game over the course of a season. That's how good that team was. And nobody talks about the defense. They always want to talk about the 10-10 tie and some of the great players on that team, Nick Getty, Terry Hanratty, Jim Seymour. But the defense with Alan Page and so forth, that was one of the keys to the game. And I think we don't talk enough about defense in college football because it's a harder game to play. Defense is harder to play than offense. So I'm going to leave you with that thought.
I didn't realize Alan Page played for Notre Dame. He was part of the Purple People Eaters, wasn't he?
Indeed, he was.
Good gracious.
NFL most valuable player one year, and became a judge.
Yes, he became a judge
in the Supreme Court of Minnesota. Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering because I was thinking Alan Page, wasn't he the judge? Because I remember he had a pretty successful career outside of football too, being
Absolutely.
a judge. Mr. Mark, thank you. You're an awesome guest, and like I said, we'll get your book out there, so hopefully people can read about the '60s and the.
So the book is titled Era, A-R-A. You won't forget that. As Coach told me, you can spell it the same way, forward and backwards. So I hope some of your listeners and followers decide to try to buy it, and I think they'd enjoy it. Not just about Notre Dame, it's about all of college football at a time when college football was very different and I think very special. So thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. And y'all, thank you for listening to the Football's Family Podcast.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.